This is Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for joining me once again, and this time I've got part 2 of my conversation with author Peter Grimsdale about his new book, Superveloce, How Italian Cars Conquered the World. And this is also the final episode of 2025, so I just want to wish all of you a wonderful holiday season. I hope you get a chance to spend time with family and friends, and I want to thank you for spending time with me right here. I do appreciate your messages and comments about the show and all of you who support Horsepower Heritage. And I thought it might be fun to learn what your favorite episode of 2025 was. There were 28 episodes this year, and I think a pretty good variety of guests. We had Alex Porter from Bring a Trailer, Chris Jacobs of Overhauling fame. There was filmmaker Ben Bertucci talking about his excellent documentary, One of One. And then I talked with the great Jim Busby, who looked back on his racing career, and the list goes on. So this is going to be extremely informal and unscientific, but let me know what your favorite episode was this year. You can message me on Instagram at Horsepower Heritage, or on Spotify, you just tap your favorite episode and scroll down and leave a comment. Or you can go to horsepowerheritage.com, click on the contact button, and send me a message from there. So lots of ways to share your thoughts. By the way, I think my favorite was the Hemi episode. That was really fun to put together. I don't know, maybe I need to do more storytelling episodes. What do you think? All right, thanks, guys. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And here's part 2 of my conversation with Peter Grimsdale. Enjoy. Part of my challenge in laying all of this out, of course, is this story is so broad. There are so many aspects, and we have to leave some stuff on the table, of course. And what I'd like to do now that we've sort of laid out a cast of characters and you've woven a lot of the history in there, Peter, let's talk about some touchstones in this broad history. One of the most remarkable in the early days is the Lingato factory.
Yeah.
The Fiat factory in Turin. The mandate from Agnelli to the architect is, I want a functional factory because, of course, he's this organizational and logistical genius. And out of that, it becomes this architectural masterpiece. This should be familiar to real car enthusiasts because the factory, well, I'll let you describe how this is organized.
It's an extraordinary creation because it's built on 5 floors. And the principle is, it was designed by a production designer. And the principle was you start on the ground floor with all the heavy presses and all the big pieces are put together. And gradually you move up a floor. And with each floor, the parts that you're putting on are lighter and lighter, and more of the car comes together. If you think about it, the last things to go on your car are the headlights and the wing mirrors and stuff like that. And then, it gets to the top, out it goes onto the roof where there is a test track. Not just a test track, but a banked test track. It's utterly extraordinary. And then, when the cars have gone around the test track, they go down a spiral track, back down onto the road, and off they go. And, I've thought about this. Is like, how come they built it this way? And I don't know the absolute answer to this, and I should have really checked it out, is that I suspect that they only had that much land.
Right.
So therefore, what are we going to do? Oh, we'll build this way, because no other factory was quite like that. And it served Fiat quite well into the 30s, but Fiat was expanding so much they then built Mirafiori, which was a much more conventional factory, built very like an American factory, just all in one line. Lots of land acquired, just stretched right out. But it's an extraordinary, and it's still there. It's been reinvented as a college and a supermarket and a hotel. You can actually go and stay in a hotel inside the factory. And you can look at the track on top. But the best thing is you can go into one of the remaining spiral roadways down the side. It's just like in a multi-story car park. But there was nothing like that in 1919 in the whole of Europe. This was so new. And there it is, just like it always was. It's quite a sight. But it just serves to point out that it's almost like the Italians can't help adding style because they don't bolt it on. It just comes from within. And so if you look at a Fiat Cinquecento, or a Topolino, it's an economy car. Nobody's going, how do we make this look pretty? It's just inherent in what they do.
It is.
And certainly when you get to the 50s, if you look at any kind of household goods, radio, mixer, kitchen knives and forks, they all have a certain, there's always a bit of style there. It cannot help but making things aesthetically pleasing.
Yes.
It's a wonderful feature.
And of course, the Lingotto factory features prominently in the original Italian Job from 1969. That's part of the car chase where the Minis are full of gold and are trying to escape Turin.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wonderful scene. Yeah.
Very important, inciting incident in my life there. I think I saw it twice in the same week when it came out. I mean, from the Lamborghini in the beginning right through to the, marvelous film. Holds up really well too.
Oh, yes. I try to watch it at least once a year. It's fantastic. Love it.
I got to tell you a little anecdote about that, which is that when they were this British film, and Michael Dealey, who's the producer, went to Turin, and he had through some aristocratic contact, he met the Agnellis, and Gianni said, "You can have Turin, fine. You can have the run of it. In fact, you can have all the cars you want, whatever you need." And so Dealey comes back and he says to Troy Kennedy Martin, the scriptwriter, he says, "Hey, it's just great. We get all the cars for free." Because at that time, the British Motor Corporation were being tricky about lending them, about letting them have. So all that all sorted out. We can have Fiats. And Troy Kennedy Martin says, "We can't do that. The Mini Cooper is an essential, integral part of this story. Is it as important as Michael Caine?
Right.
As a character, they had to be Minis."
Yes, absolutely. Hey guys, I want to take a quick break to say if you enjoy Horsepower Heritage, there are a few ways you can support the show. Go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage and become a patron. There's a link in the show notes. You can make a one-time donation or you can support the show monthly. It's easy, and for the price of a latte, you can help me continue to bring you more of the people and stories behind the machines. You can also leave 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify because that helps new listeners discover the show. Thanks for your support, and now back to the show. All right, another giant in the early days was Vincenzo Lancia, who we've mentioned, but and he was born in 1881, so he's between Agnelli and Battista in age. And he founded Lancia in 1906 while he was still working at Fiat. During the war, all the Italian car makers, of course, have switched to wartime production. And the big question is, what do we do afterwards? And for the Italians, the war ends a bit earlier than the rest of us, right? Because essentially the Allies are on the ground there in 43. The Germans are in retreat by 44. And they're already thinking about their post-war products.
Yeah, they are, because that's kind of in their nature. Yeah, maybe everybody was. I mean, William Lyons was busy, getting his guys to design the XK engine while bombs were falling on Coventry. But I think that's the designers naturally look ahead. I mean, what mustn't be forgotten is, as the Allies were working their way up Italy. I mean, there was the pitched battle all the way up, and it's to the Turinese resistance's great credit that they managed to get rid of the Wehrmacht before the Allies even arrived. The Americans arrived in Turin, and the trams were running and the shops were open. The resistance had done an incredible job. The partisans done an incredible job of seeing them off. I mean, but going back to your point, I mean, as soon as it was becoming clear quite soon to people like Agnelli that the war was not going to last, and they very rapidly started kind of making overtures towards the Allies and saying, we're here, what can we do, sort of thing. Very tricky, because at any moment the Germans could have basically shipped off all the tooling and all the workforce. And there was a constant threat of that. And in fact, the guy running Alfa Romeo at the time, who was assassinated shortly after the liberation because he was regarded as having worked too closely with the Germans. But the other argument was, and his son would say that, in fact, what he was trying to do was keep the factory running, because if he didn't, they'd just ship the whole thing to Germany, which they did. They did do. A lot of Italian men were forced to go and work in Italy, and a lot of kit was moved as well.
Yes.
It was a unimaginable time.
His name was Ugo Gobetto.
Thank you.
Yes. You're right. I think it was true that a lot of car designers and engineers were thinking about their post-war products before the end of hostilities. But I feel like it's different in Italy in a way, because things are very fluid at that point and they are kind of bombed out. I guess it comes back to a certain optimism and resilience the Italians have, And I suppose that was, you can see the threads of that, after the first war and in the interwar period, particularly when there are these market crashes. And so they're planning. And after the war, everyone in our story seems to have this second career.
Yeah.
For example, at Lancia.
Well, there's a young guy recruited at Lancia just before the war, in fact, and one of the first tasks he is given is to try and work out how to make a V6 work. And there's a problem with V6, which is that you have to get the various angles exactly right. I'm sorry, I'm not an engineer and I can't explain it exactly to you, but he basically got it right. He got it sorted, and it meant that they could make a production viable V6 engine. And that was a tremendous thing, because it really, it boosted him, and it meant that Lancia had a fresh new thing to go with after the war. But he was enormously helped by having Vittorio Jano there, because Jano, having served his time at Alfa Romeo, actually ended up falling out with the management. Alfa Romeo management was always turbulent. And even though the business had been nationalized, there was still a lot of infighting. And Jano was basically given the heave ho, because the Grand Prix cars weren't winning anymore. It wasn't his fault that he didn't have the backing. He didn't have the finance, the backing, the resources, and he left. And with extraordinary bit of synchronicity, poor old Vincenzo Lancia died quite early. He was only in his, I think he was in the late 40s or early 50s. Sorry, I can't remember exactly.
It was 1937, and he had a sudden heart attack.
Yeah, that was it. Gone suddenly. And he's leaving the business, leaving his wife in charge of the business. And she hired Jano, which was a brilliant move, because it was not an easy move, because Vincenzo had this group of engineers who he held very close. They were like his other children, practically. They were a really tight mob. He loved these guys, and they were very tight. They were also bereft, and it was kind of difficult at first for Jano to kind of break into that. But eventually, working with Giglio, they solved this V6 problem, and then Vincenzo's son Gianni, another Gianni, became involved in the business, and he was like, "Right, guys, let's go and do some post-war cars. Let's get on with it." And off they went, and created the Aurelia, which was a truly fabulous saloon car and a great coupe and race-winning sports car.
Yeah, wonderful car. And the V6 wasn't its only sophisticated technical aspect. They had inboard brakes and all sorts of marvelous features.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Wonderfully innovative. And also, one of the things I love about Lancias is that they from the 1930s, they'd have these, the doors that opened with no B-pillar. They'd open, I don't know what you guys call it in the States, where you have no B-pillar, you open the front door, the back door, they close together.
We call that a suicide door arrangement, just because the rear doors open with the hinge at the rear. So Yeah, the most prominent example of that in American car design would be the 1961 Lincoln Continental.
Of course.
So,
Yes. Yeah.
but yeah,
No pillar in the middle. Lots of lovely features, and they did a little one called the Appia, which is a V4. It's like a scaled down Aurelia, which is a completely charming, so small, and the V4 is about the size of my laptop in front of me, and it's just quite amazing.
Yeah, love it. Especially the first series Appia is just a really attractive little car. They got a bit frumpy late in the run, but the first series, second series are great. Alfa Romeo's fortunes are very different after the war. They had been sort of an exclusive manufacturer, but they have the clever idea of going a bit more mass market. Let's say mid-range with their cars after the war, which really allowed them to survive. I don't think they would have stayed around if they had continued to build the same high-end car that they were building before the war.
I mean, it's a problem for quite a few European, lovely European cars like Lagonda or Invicta. These companies building high-end cars with a very variable economic situation, and they're all craft. It's all hand built. It's very, very hard to scale up. So you basically charge people a lot of money and hope you'll make some profit that way. It's not really a way to run a business. And although Alfa Romeo did have the comfort of being a nationalized industry, and interestingly, one of the few pieces of the Mussolini fascist apparatus that survived into the post-war era was the IRA, the Industrial Reconstruction Organization, that through which Alfa Romeo and several other companies were nationalized right up until the 80s. But I think the guys that came in after the war just thought, well, we need to cut our cloth to fit this new world. There really wasn't. Nobody knew that the economic miracle was around the corner. Nobody knew that Marshall Aid was going to kick in the way it did. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but also I think some quite inspired recognition that the world was changing, and yet making small cars had become more profitable, providing you introduced more mass production. And so rather slowly and painfully, Alfa Romeo eased themselves into modern mass production in a way that Lancia never succeeded in doing it. And they did through a lot of good engineering. I mean, again, it was lots of clever engineers and a certain amount of luck. But they said, right, let's design they did that the smallish 4-cylinder twin cam engine. It's just such a great engine. You can put it in anything. You can find it in trucks in Italy. They put it in anything. It was such a user-friendly engine.
1300cc, high revving, really a joy to drive. I actually have a 1960 Giulietta Spider, and it is so much fun to drive.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Which is a Pininfarina design, of course.
Of course.
They were planning the Giulietta Berlina, the little sedan, with that 1300cc twin cam, and it wasn't quite ready. And this was a problem for Alfa because they had sold bonds to raise cash to produce this car, and people could redeem those bonds for a bit of profit, right? But the Berlina wasn't ready, and they sort of called an audible play, as we might say in the US, and they designed the Spider, and they could get the Spider ready faster. They also had a lottery for, I think, 200 people that were holding the bonds. They would get a new Alfa Romeo. So the Spider kind of kept that scheme intact, right?
Yeah. And this is extraordinary because this takes us into a very interesting area. How come when all the coach builders in Europe were folding at the end of the war, all those great coach builders, they were just like gone. And the 50s became a golden age for the Italian carrozzeria. And it's partly because not only that were they really good at designing, but they had enough facility to build. Yeah, we can do you a couple of hundred of those. Yeah, no problem. We can do you a couple of hundred of those. No problem. Just send us design. We'll get some guys in. We'll sort it out. If we can't do it all in house, we'll get our guys down the road, our cousins down the road. They can help out. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. There was an extraordinary network, and so often you find, um, you find there was a car I was writing about quite recently. It was designed by Michelotti, but it was built by Gear, because Michelotti at that time was freelance. So we didn't have any facilities for building, but Gia built it. And then there's the example of the going back to the Lancia B20 for a moment. The coupe was actually designed by, I think Buono designed it, but they didn't have room to build it. So Pininfarina ended up building it, even though he hadn't designed it. But he was okay with that because it kind of looked a little like his style, and he was no problem. And so you get these companies like Bertone and Pininfarina in particular. They become really big organizations in the 50s and 60s, building thousands and thousands of bodies. And it's just when you go, hang on, but don't we all have unitary construction now? I mean, how does that even work? Well, these cars were kind of built on platforms, and you could build so the sedan would be a kind of, proper unitary construction car, but the coupe would be, or the Spider would be kind of like using the same platform, but we just bolt on something else. It's that willingness to be flexible. This is just so fabulous.
Absolutely. And the Italians thrived. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Just extraordinary. And I think there's a reason for that, which goes back to the 30s, which was when, I mean, they were very unsnobbish about what they built. So the Fiat Baila, which was basically a very, very straight, basic, like a Ford A kind of, straight up and down, no frills, mass production car, 1931, and you could buy the chassis, and coach builders built, yeah. Yeah, we want a bit more style. Yeah, I just want to stand out a little bit. So let's see if we. So they were very willing to build bodies on inexpensive car chassis. So they were very. They weren't. There was no snobbery. I think the people like Park Ward and Mulliner in Britain didn't really stoop to that kind of thing.
No.
But the Italians. No.
After the war, Enzo Ferrari, at the age of 48, establishes Automobili Ferrari, his own brand. And he'd kind of been champing at the bit to do this for a long time, but contractually, he was prohibited from using his name for some time.
When he finally cut the cord with Alfa Romeo, and the deal was I think he was quite substantially paid off, but they wanted him to kind of stay under wraps. I mean, in fact, the war came, so it became irrelevant. But the very first car he did build after that time couldn't be called a Ferrari. But as soon as the war was over, everything had changed, and so off he went. But really, what he wanted to do was build racing cars. That was his priority. And I think at that stage, and let's think about this. It's the late 40s. There's all this rationing and shortages, petrol and whatever. Well, who's going to even buy a V12 engine sports car? Who is going to buy this car? Well, turns out Americans.
Absolutely.
And Cinetti, who is an Italian expatriate, who had raced in the 20s and 30s, and indeed won Le Mans in the 30s. He'd been living in America for some time, and he came over and said, "You know what? I could sell a few of these. If you build a sports car, I can sell a few of these." And that's kind of how he said, "Look at these MGs. Look what else is selling here. We can, the people want to move on to something else. Nobody minds about the cost of the fuel. These, you build a V12, they'll sell them. And America is key, I think, in my opinion, to Ferrari starting off.
No doubt about it.
As a maker of road cars.
And the concept of the sports car is kind of new in America.
Totally, yes.
In the broader sense, I mean,
yeah, Michel Cavalli, who is a bit of a hero of mine, when he sees the MGTC in that sunny morning in New Orleans, he said he writes in his own memoir. He said, "I hadn't even heard the term sports car." Okay, extraordinary.
And by 1954 or so, Ferrari is just absolutely dominant in competition and remains so for many years.
Quite extraordinary. And I think, you just got to hand it to them because these cars worked right from the get-go. His first cars won races straight away. And he was also very canny about changing tack. So, he immediately wants to compete with the Alphettas. And these are very, very kind of highly strung, tiny little engines with, 1.5 liter engines with superchargers and everything, very, very thirsty cars. And he realizes that actually what he needs to do to beat them is not have one of those because the formula allows him to have a 4.5 liter, a naturally aspirated car. And he goes, we got to do one of those. And that's how he gets going. He's very good at just reading the room and just going, we need to do that.
But one of his customers isn't so keen on the Ferrari build quality. He's got some problems with it. And he's a tractor manufacturer named Ferruccio Lamborghini.
Yes. I mean, this is interesting because, Ferrari, it's hard to imagine this because Ferrari road cars are so beautiful, but they're kind of beautiful thanks to people like Pininfarina. Ferrari didn't care a whole lot about his road cars. It was simply a revenue stream to finance the racing. And in fact, I think if Chinetti hadn't come along and said, build some cars that we can sell, I'll sell them in America, he might have just gone on because he had a whole thing going during the war, making machines that built ball bearings and stuff. He could have, he could have had light industrial operation going on and just using that to fund his racing. I don't think he actually was dreaming of road cars. He was dreaming of racing cars in Grand Prix. So I don't think he cared as much about the road car experience. And Lamborghini was absolutely right. They're hard to drive. And he hit upon a very simple idea, really, which was to build a similar kind of car that was just easy to drive in traffic, that would be happy driving along at 30 miles an hour.
And as everyone knows, Ferrari sort of brushed off Lamborghini's criticisms and kind of told him, stick to tractors. And Lamborghini decided, you know what, I'm going to build my own sports car. And he does. And by 1963, he's got one on the stand at the Turin Motor Show. And then the groundbreaking Lamborghini model comes along, the Miura. And it's unlike anything that we'd seen before. The engine is in the rear. It's the lowest production car in terms of its height. It's like a meter tall, right? Or less than a meter. And it has this incredible coachwork. Just a marvelous car.
Yeah. But the extraordinary thing about the V12 engine in the back, transverse engine, and they got that idea from the Mini.
Right.
They said, hey, why don't we just do it? Do it like the Mini. Put it in sideways. It's wide. We can have a nice wide track. We can get it all in there. Astonishing. It's just wonderfully, wonderfully courageous thing to do, really. And yes, and then comes the body.
Yes. And there are two very important designers at this point, Giugiaro, and then later Marcello Gandini. And Giugiaro is the senior of the two. And they sort of rewrite the book in a way on Italian body styling.
Yeah. I have to just say quickly though that the first person to do a shape for the Miura is Federico Fomenti, who was he's the most wonderful, least known car designer because he was very happy just stay in the back room. He was Touring's guy, and he did the Fiat Barchetta and he did the Aston Martin DB4, which is quite and some other considerable road cars. And in fact, he did do an initial design for the Miura, but Touring was folding at that moment, and so Lamborghini took it to Bertone, and those two young guys. It's interesting, the Miura, because probably 4 people were involved in it: Fomenti, those two guys, and Bertone. He was a business guy, basically, Bertone, but he did have an eye. So between them, I think they got it rather wonderfully done.
Absolutely. Another sea change comes in 1969 when Ferrari recognizes that he needs help financially. The business it's tenuous, let's say, but he wants to continue to race. He rebuffs overtures from Ford to acquire the company, but he knows he can't hold out forever, and he finds a willing partner in Johnny Agnelli.
And it's very interesting to kind of look at the sort of genesis of that, because along the way, one thing I always thought was really interesting was how Americans got fought. Were fought. I mean, Ford tried very hard, many times, to try and get a foothold in Italy, and was rebuffed. But it was very telling to me when I was looking at what happened to Fiat immediately after the war, and Valletta, who was in charge at the time, was under house arrest while the liberation authorities tried to make up their mind whether he was a collaborator or not. And suddenly a rumor goes around that GM might be buying Fiat. Made sense. They'd been over. They were looking at all kinds of bits of defeated Europe. They obviously famously all went and had a look at Volkswagen and Wolfsburg and so forth. But rumor went round, General Motors might be buying Fiat. Suddenly Valletta is released, put back in charge. That's not going to happen. And the minute he's released, he gets on the plane and gets to America and starts talking to the Bank of America before Marshall Plan happens. He's out there straight away. And of course, I didn't know this until quite recently, but once upon a time, the Bank of America was called the Bank of Italy.
That's right.
It was started by an Italian
in San Francisco.
And the guy who founded and ran it, he was like, "We're here to help." And so, they very, very swiftly got to go very, very keen to whatever. But another interesting thing that happened was when Lancia went bust in the mid-50s, it was at a time when it had a fantastic racing team. I mean, Vincenzo's son had really gone for it. We're gonna have amazing red cars, and we're gonna take on Ferrari and Alfa Romeo. I mean, it was kind of crazy. And he had Yano there, dream team. What could go wrong? And he built these very successful, very promising Grand Prix cars, and then the whole business went bust. So what was going to happen? And again, a rumor went round that Daimler-Benz might just buy the whole lot because they were the main competition at the time. So we cannot let this happen. And a very interesting arrangement came to be that was orchestrated by a guy called Caracciolo, who is not a relation of the racing driver, but a very prominent Italian statesman. And he basically orchestrated a deal whereby Lancia, the business, was sold to a cement manufacturer, and the racing team was kind of given to Ferrari. But Ferrari, who was always good at driving a very hard bargain, said, "Well, that's all very well, but how am I going to run this?" An arrangement was made whereby by Fiat pretty much fronted up the money to support the team. And it's one of those things where if you imagine the whole of the Italian auto industry as one big Italian family, we got, these guys got into trouble. Let's bring him back in. Let's sort him out. Let's keep it. We'll give him some, we'll give him this and we'll give him that. And maybe we can, and it's kind of what happens right at the end of my story when, suddenly you find that Alfa Romeo, Lancia, Ferrari, Maserati, they all get absorbed into the Fiat operation. And it's all about keeping it in the family. It's quite extraordinary. But so Ferrari, having been willfully, determinedly independent, the one thing he won, he wrestled himself away from Alfa Romeo. And I mean, I don't know what I think about this, but one theory is he played Ford to get Fiat. I'm just not sure about that. Maybe not. I just don't know. But sure as hell, Fiat came on board not long afterwards with the deal he wanted. He wanted to be able to run his own racing team and somebody else to look after the road car business and somebody else to look after the bottom line. And so he got exactly what he needed. that really, I don't know who else would have given that to him. But I think Agnelli just took the long view, saw it, the broad, this is partly for Italy's sake.
Right. And Fiat, by the late 1960s, had done very well for itself. Throughout the 50s, they brought out a succession of very popular, inexpensive cars, the Cinquecento, the Seicento, the Millecento, on and on it goes. Valletta is in charge at Fiat until, I think, 1966. He finally retires, and he's like in his 80s already.
Extraordinary.
And it's finally time for Johnny Agnelli to step up after all of his jet setting and Playboy years, right? And so Ferrari, the road car division, is sold to Fiat. Ferrari retains, I think, a 40% share.
I think sold is a bit strong.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
More into the direction of the Fiat.
Let's say a partial acquisition.
Yes.
Yeah. And Ferrari maintains the racing division, and of course, continues to be very influential in Formula One. They kind of leave sports car racing aside, and so it's interesting. Johnny Agnelli, he's kind of characterized as the uncrowned king of Italy. Such is his power by the 1970s. So, yeah, it's a marvelous story. Peter, what was your most surprising discovery in doing your research? Was there anything that really stood out?
Oh God! I mean, there were so many things.
Yeah.
I mean, I think because there's so much folklore about Italian cars being unreliable or badly made or whatever. People in Britain go on about the rust because they're talking about the cars of the 80s. 70s and 80s, which, the build quality did suffer. I should point out to potential readers that I bring my story to a sort of a close at the end of the 1960s, because I feel like that is the end of the Renaissance. And the story that follows, which I sort of cover off in the epilogue, it becomes a much more complicated and so much darker story because you get the Red Brigades. You get Fiat executives being kidnapped. It's quite an ugly time for a whole variety of reasons that is worthy of a different kind of book. And I just felt like I was wanted to kind of like reach that high point with the Mirror. I just felt that was the moment, where it all came together so brilliantly. And it's the time when Italian cars are so revered. There's that wonderful Frank Sinatra's quote about if you want to be somebody, you drive a Ferrari. If you already are somebody, drive a Lamborghini. I can't remember. But the idea that these two, an American, albeit an Italian American, who is a superstar, and an Italian American, is talking about, if you want to be the best in the world, these are the choices, Ferrari or Lamborghini. I just felt that was such a high watermark. But I did try and cover off the rest of the story. And indeed, in the paperback version, which I'm just readying at the moment, I've had to make a small alteration, as the boss of Stellantis has just changed, and indeed the CEO is an Italian.
Ah, good. Yes. Well, and there are so many aspects of the story we, of course, didn't cover. I mean, you go into great detail about a lot of the racing, many of the great drivers, a lot more to discover in the book. It's called Superveloce: How Italian Cars Conquered the World. It's published by Simon & Schuster. Peter Grimsdale, thank you so much for being on.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Maurice. It's great talking to you again.